Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating and often pretty mysterious topic from ancient texts, the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just about, giants and lore. We're looking at a core debate over just a few verses in Genesis that have sparked, centuries of interpretation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Our mission today is a careful textual analysis. We're specifically focusing on excerpts from the Nephilim myth, a textual analysis of Genesis 3 through 6 by Samuel Delgado.
Okay.
So the goal is really to unpack that foundational text Genesis chapter cites, but by looking very closely at its immediate context, what's happening right there in Genesis.
Right in Genesis itself.
And just to be clear, our role here is to explore the arguments Delgado puts forward. We're not endorsing a specific theological view, just conveying the ideas from the source.
Exactly. So the big question, the one we're really grappling with, is who exactly were these sons of God and daughters of men we read about in Genesis 6? And what does figuring that out tell us about the Nephilim themselves? We'll explore the two main views, but really focus on how this author, Delgado, argues for understanding it mainly through the story that's already unfolding in Genesis chapters 3 through 6.
And honestly, prepare to be a bit surprised. The insight here is how the very structure and the language of Genesis might already be giving us the answers, sort of like breadcrumbs leading up to chapter 6.
Interesting.
It's really about letting the text speak for itself, maybe more than we usually do.
Okay, let's set that stage then, because context seems, absolutely crucial here.
It is.
The wickedness we see in Genesis 6, the author argues it isn't some, sudden bolt from the blue, right?
No, definitely not. It's presented as a continuation, like a downward spiral of depravity. It starts way back, Genesis 3, in the garden.
Unfall, yeah.
Then it moves out to the land in Genesis 4 with Cain.
The murder, the separation.
Exactly. And by the time we get to Genesis 6, it's not just one lineage or one place. It's everywhere. The whole world is affected.
So it's pervasive. This wickedness has really spread.
Precisely. It's not confined anymore. It's become the general state of humanity, which, sets this grim stage for what comes next, God's judgment.
Okay. Now, here's the pivot point, right? The core interpretative hinge for the whole Nephilim discussion. How do we define sons of God in Genesis 6, verses 2 and 4? This seems to be where everything splits.
It really is. It's the cornerstone. And there are basically two main ways people have understood this.
Okay, what are they?
So the first one is often called the angelic view.
Right. Heard of that one.
This view suggests that these sons of God are, actual angels.
Celestial beings.
Okay. And the support for that.
Those who hold this view often look outside Genesis. They point mainly to the book of Job, chapters 1, 2, and 38, where that specific phrase, sons of God, does seem to refer to angels.
So Job uses it that way.
Yes, and the author we're looking at, Delgado, acknowledges that. Job does seem to use it for angels in those instances.
But, there's a but, I take it. There is. Delgado challenges relying too heavily on Job for the Genesis meaning. He argues that Job's usage isn't necessarily automatically relevant to Genesis 6.
How so?
Well, he points out that words can have different meanings depending on context, like the word angel itself, or even Elohim, which can mean God, gods, or even human judges sometimes.
Ah, okay. So sons of God could also shift meaning.
That's the argument. He's basically saying, hold on, let's see what Genesis itself suggests before we import a definition from Job. Context first.
Makes sense.
And what's really interesting here, maybe compelling, is that while the angelic view often leans heavily, almost solely on Job for that definition,
Yeah.
the term sons of God actually appears elsewhere in the Bible, and more often it refers to humans.
Really? Like where?
Well, think about Hosea 1.10, John 1.12, Romans 8, Philippians 2, 1 John 3. In these places, sons of God or children of God almost always describes people in a covenant relationship with God or, the righteous line.
So the broader biblical usage points towards humans.
More often than not, yes. So the argument becomes, shouldn't the immediate context of Genesis 6 take precedence over a different book, Job, written, likely at a different time, different genre?
Okay, context is king. So if we're sticking within Genesis, where does it start setting up this distinction before we even hit chapter 6? How does it prepare us?
Well, it's subtle, but Delgado argues it's definitely there, starting in Genesis 4. It's about how the lineages of Cain and Seth are described.
Go on.
Okay, look at Genesis 4.1. When Eve gives birth to Cain, she says, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Man-ish.
Okay, man.
But then later, after Abel's death, when Seth is born, Genesis 4.25 says Eve bore a son. Ben.
Son. Okay, man for Cain, son for Seth. That's interesting.
It is. Delgado suggests this careful word choice might be setting up the very terminology we find later in Genesis 6, the daughters of men, potentially linking back to Cain's line, and the sons of God, linking to Seth's line, the promised sons, like a linguistic key.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty specific. What else? Is it just words?
No, not just words. There's also what Delgado calls a lineage distinction based on, well, proximity, or lack thereof.
Meaning.
Genesis 4 tells us Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod. And then he built a city named Enoch.
Right. He establishes his own separate place.
Exactly. He builds his own society, his own culture, physically and spiritually away from God's presence and presumably away from Adam, Eve, and later, Seth's family. The text, crucially, doesn't show these two lines, the Cainites and Sethites, interacting at all during this period.
So a clear separation geographically, socially.
And spiritually, yeah.
Yeah.
Suggesting distinct paths.
Okay, that makes sense. So different terms, different locations.
Yeah.
What about their character? Is there a moral difference highlighted?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And it's stark. The text paints a picture of Cain's lineage spiraling downward pretty dramatically.
How so?
Well, Cain himself, obviously, a murderer. Then you get to his descendant, Lamech. Genesis 4 tells us he took 2 wives.
Polygamy, right. First instance mentioned.
Right, a deviation from the one-man, one-woman model in Genesis 2. And then Lamech actually boasts about killing a man in this song of vengeance he sings to his wives in Genesis 4.2324. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah, it is. A song about violence.
Delgado even suggests that the names in Cain's line might reflect this decline, this separation from God. He interprets them as things like rebellious city dweller, one who strikes out against Yahweh Elohim, one who kills the peace of Elohim, the king. These are the emerging mighty men of violence and rebellion.
Wow. Okay, so that's Cain's line. What about Seth's?
It's presented as a complete contrast. Genesis 5, which details Seth's line, actually starts by deliberately reminding us that God created man in his own image.
Ah, circling back to the beginning.
Exactly. And it says Seth was created in Adam's image, who was made in God's image. So this son of God characteristic, this divine image connection, is being passed down through Seth.
Right.
And this line includes figures like Enoch, who famously walked with God. Not just lived, but walked with him. And Noah, who the text says would bring comfort concerning the work and toil from the ground God had cursed.
So a totally different spiritual trajectory. Righteousness, walking with God, comfort versus violence, polygamy, rebellion.
Precisely. It's a very clear moral and spiritual distinction being drawn between the two lineages in chapters 4 and 5.
Okay, let me try and summarize this then. What you're saying, or what Delgado argues, is that Genesis 4 and 5 are carefully setting the stage. They distinguish Seth's descendants, potentially the sons of God, from Cain's descendants, potentially the daughters of men, using specific language, son versus man, showing their physical separation and highlighting these really divergent moral and spiritual paths.
That's it, exactly. He argues that this detailed setup provides the complete context needed to understand Genesis 6 without having to, pull in angels from another book. The groundwork is all laid right there.
It does seem to build a strong internal logic, yeah.
It does.
Okay, so with that context firmly in mind, now the separated lineages, the distinct moral paths, how did that change how we read Genesis 6.1 to 40?
Well, let's look at verse 1. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them.
Okay.
This multiplying makes perfect sense if you think about Cain's lineage, with Lamech's polygamy building a city. Their numbers would likely grow faster. These men and daughters are arguably the Cainites.
Right, the ones establishing their own society.
And verse 2, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose.
Okay, here's the crucial interaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Delgado argues the most natural reading, flowing directly from chapters 4 and 5, is that the Sethite men, the sons of God, the line that should have remained separate and faithful, saw the beauty of the Cainite women, the daughters of men, and broke that separation. They intermarried based on appearance, choosing whomever they wanted.
So the sin here is the mixing of the righteous line with the unrighteous, breaking that covenant separation.
That seems to be the implication, yes. It fits the established context perfectly. And the author finds that trying to insert angels here feels, in his words, extremely forced.
Forced how?
Well, he says angels are just suddenly inserted into the text without any warning. There's no prior mention or setup for them being involved in human affairs like this in Genesis. And critically, he points out, they are never mentioned again after verse 4. If they were key players in this major corruption event, Why do they just vanish from the narrative? That silence is significant.
Yeah, that is a good question. What about verse 3?
Verse 3. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. This is God's response to this intermingling and growing wickedness. It's a judgment on mankind, setting a limit either, some say, the eventual human lifespan, or perhaps the time remaining until the flood itself. To begin, notice the focus. Man, right.
Okay, and then verse 4, the Nephilim arrive. Everyone thinks giants. What's the take here?
Okay, the Nephilim. Let's pause here because the word itself is important. The King James Version translated it as giants, and that image stuck.
Definitely.
But most modern translations keep the Hebrew word Nephilim. It comes from the root nephal, which means to fall. So they are the fallen ones.
Fallen ones, okay.
Now, Strong's Concordance does offer giant as one possibility, but it also offers bully or tyrant. This suggests it might be more about their character, their nature, than just their physical size.
Like powerful, maybe oppressive figures.
Exactly. And Delgado argues Genesis 6.4 itself defines them. It says, there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.
Okay, so the verse connects Nephilim to mighty men, men of renown.
Precisely. Mighty men, Gibberim in Hebrew. This links them directly to that violent, aggressive nature we saw foreshadowed in Cain's line, particularly with Lamech boasting about his strength and vengeance. These are warriors, powerful figures, famous for their deeds, likely violent ones.
And what about the timing in those days and also after that?
Delgado interprets in those days as the period when Cain's rebellious lineage was multiplying and becoming powerful on its own. The Nephilim, these mighty men, were already emerging from that line, and also after that refers to the period after the Sethites, sons of God, intermarried with the Cainites, daughters of men, producing more of these same kinds of people.
So Nephilim existed before the intermarriage and also resulted from it. They're essentially the product of this whole downward spiral of violence and rebellion.
That's the argument. They represent the violent character dominating the age, and crucially, notice the verse calls them mighty men and men of renown, twice emphasizing their human nature.
Men, not angel-human hybrids.
Right. The term mighty men fits perfectly with warriors, tyrants, the kind of figures whose violence eventually fills the earth, which Genesis 6.11 explicitly mentions as the reason for the flood. The emphasis, Delgado stresses, is on their nature, their power, violence, renown, not necessarily just towering physical stature, though they might have been large too, but that's secondary.
Okay, this interpretation seems internally consistent within Genesis. But here's a point that really strikes me, based on what you said earlier about angels disappearing. If angels, the sons of God, in that view, were directly involved in this forbidden union, creating these Nephilim, why does the text seem to go completely silent about judging them?
That is, for Delgado, one of the most critical points against the angelic view. It's a huge omission.
Yeah, it seems like it.
The text makes absolutely zero mention of the sons of God after verse 4. They just vanish. Now, if you take the Sethite view...
The human lineage view.
Right. If the sons of God were the Sethites, this silence makes perfect sense. Why? Because after the intermarriage, that distinction between the righteous line and the unrighteous line essentially dissolves. They merge into this widespread wickedness, and the focus shifts to the one righteous family left, Noah's, who carries humanity through the flood. The separate categories cease to exist in the same way.
Okay, so the silence fits that narrative.
But from the angelic view, Delgado finds it quite perplexing. If angels were these central characters committing this massive transgression, shouldn't they be explicitly judged, or at least mentioned again in the context of the flood judgment? But nothing.
Instead, the focus is elsewhere.
Completely. The text, as we noted with verse 3, repeatedly focuses on the state and judgment of man. Look at verses 5 through 7 of Genesis 6.
What do they say?
They state explicitly, God saw that the wickedness of man was great. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth.
Man. It's all about humanity.
Consistently. The text leaves no ambiguity about who is being judged and why. It's human wickedness and human violence corrupting the earth.
So what about the idea, which you hear sometimes, that the flood was necessary to, purify the human gene pool from angelic contamination, to save the line for the Messiah?
Delgado addresses that directly. He states very clearly that within the Genesis text itself, there is no judgment on hybrids, And in fact, no mention of hybrids whatsoever,
None at all.
not in Genesis 6. That whole idea of saving humanity from hybridization to preserve a pure seed line, he argues, is a fabrication, even a fable, that's read into the text but isn't actually derived from it.
Wow. So strip away later traditions or interpretations, and Genesis 6 is purely about human sin leading to human judgment.
According to this analysis, yes. The focus is squarely, repeatedly on human depravity, the grief it causes God, and God's resulting judgment on humanity through the flood, saving only Noah and his family. It's a human story, start to finish.
Okay. So just to kind of wrap this deep dive up, the core insight from Delgado's analysis seems to be that if we stick really closely to the internal narrative of Genesis itself, chapters 3 through 6, then the sons of God and daughters of men can be understood pretty straightforwardly as these two distinct human lineages, the Sethites and the Cainites. And the Nephilim are their offspring, or maybe even just the powerful, violent men typical of that corrupt time. It avoids bringing in supernatural elements that aren't explicitly detailed or judged within the immediate story.
That's a great summary. It really highlights how crucial context is, doesn't it? How reading within the narrative flow of Genesis itself can lead to a very different conclusion than, say, starting with an external idea, like angels from Job, and fitting Genesis into that.
Right. Different frameworks lead to vastly different takes on the same few verses.
It really encourages that critical thinking about where we're getting our interpretations from. Is it grounded in the text we're actually reading, letting its own structure and language guide us? Or are we bringing in outside traditions, maybe without even realizing it, that shape how we see it?
Yeah, that's a powerful point, and it leads perfectly into sort of a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on.
Okay.
What other ancient stories or maybe even modern concepts or news events might we be interpreting through a lens we brought to it, rather than letting the original source, the original text, the raw information speak for itself first?
That's a challenging question.
What new insights, what different understandings might we uncover if we just paused, looked more closely at the material right in front of us, and focused on the core message, the internal logic, rather than maybe getting sidetracked by the mysterious bits or filling gaps with outside ideas?
It's a worthwhile exercise, for sure.
Definitely. So we really encourage you to continue your own deep dives, whatever the topic might be, and just explore how that close, careful reading of the sources can unlock some really unexpected understanding.
Well said.
Until next time, keep digging.